Right on.
I'm Joan Farini-Mundy, president of the University of Maine and its regional campus, the University of Maine at Machias. As we near the start of Black History Month, I wish everyone health, peace, and goodwill. I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation with Dr. Sonia Sanchez and Dr. John Bracy, titled Black Studies in 21st Century Higher Education. The University of Maine recognizes that it is located on Marsh Island, in the homeland of the Penobscot Nation, where issues of water and territorial rights and encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing. Penobscot homeland is connected to the other Wabanaki tribal nations, the Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Micmac, through kinship, alliances, and diplomacy. The university also recognizes that the Penobscot Nation and the other Wabanaki tribal nations are distinct, sovereign, legal, and political entities with their own powers of self-governance and self-determination. The University of Maine at Machias also recognizes that it is located on lands of the Passamaquoddy tribe. Structural racism continues to be endemic in our society and institutions. At the inauguration of President Biden and Vice President Harris, Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman refers to the United States as a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. As learners, we know that education can reframe and recenter history, as well as provide opportunities to create equitable and inclusive communities. And at the University of Maine and the University of Maine at Machias, we're committed to inclusion, diversity, equity, and anti-racism. The President's Council on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion that I appointed last summer released its initial findings and recommendations, and the senior leaders and I have already started engaging with the Council co-chairs about how to implement the recommendations. We are working to ensure inclusiveness in our community and that Black, Brown, and Indigenous people can pursue their dreams to the fullest. Thank you to all who had a role in bringing these insightful leaders for this important discussion, including the University of Maine Black Student Union, University of Maine Alumni Association, Cultural Affairs Distinguished Lecture Series Fund, McGillicuddy Humanities Center, College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, the Departments of Anthropology, Communication and Journalism, Native American Studies, Political Science, Sociology, and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. I look forward to learning more about Dr. Sanchez and Dr. Bracy's experiences, their work toward racial justice, their perspectives about this incredible moment in time, and their thoughts about the impact of Black studies in 21st century higher education. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Black History Month kickoff event, Black Studies in 21st Century Higher Education. I'm Lauren, and I am so excited tonight to witness and moderate this conversation between two legendary Black scholars, Dr. Sonia Sanchez and Dr. John Bracy. Welcome, you both.
Hello, how are you?
Good, good. So
Here.
I really just want to open up the floor to have Dr. Bracy begin. So, Dr. Bracy, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks a lot, Lauren. A lot of credit goes to Lauren for pushing everybody to do this. It got a lot bigger than when it started out, when she first said, would you help me out a little bit? And I said, oh, I'll give a talk. And next thing you know, we're on YouTube. So that's progress. I'm going to begin with my conclusions. So if I don't get back to them, you will hear them. The reason you need Black studies at the beginning and why you need it today is, first of all, you have to correct the false narratives about America's being a monocultural society, a monocultural civilization. The hard reality is that from the beginning of the United States, from the beginning of colonization, Europeans arrived on a place that already had people here who had been here for thousands of years. So minimum, you have two cultures. And we still have those names. Like I'm in Massachusetts, you have Connecticut. These are all Native American names. You bring along African people to do the work. Europeans didn't come by themselves. They looked around and needed help with labor. And you drag in, 20 to 30 million people of African descent. So you automatically, without even thinking about it, you have three different major cultural groups in one space. So to even try to pretend that this is a monocultural society, it's absurd on the face of it. Just go through the names of the states, and you have all these Native American names, or the names of the rivers, or the names of the mountains, the names of the streams, the names of the foods we eat. You will see that we've always been a multicultural nation. The issue is, what does that mean? How do you acknowledge that? And Black Studies is a part of that in terms of emphasizing the African-American experience. That's why you have Black Studies. We're not all of that. We are our part of this broader kind of mosaic, right? The second thing is that it's kind of obvious if you just count heads around the world, the vast majority of people on the planet are people of color. There's just no way around that. 1 out of 4 people on the planet are Chinese, like 1 out of 4. Doesn't make any sense to talk about Western civilization dictating things. 1 out of 4 people on the planet are Chinese. Right behind them are people from the Indian subcontinent, another almost 2 billion people. That's a big chunk of the world's populations. Those are civilizations that go back some thousands and thousands of years. So it's quite presumptuous to assume that a country that's barely 300 years old should dictate their behavior, and how people ought to organize their societies who've been around 10,000 years, 5,000 years. I mean, just the arrogance of it is just kind of staggering just on the face of it. America is a developing country. Sister Goldman was right about that. We're not an advanced country. We are a developing country. We haven't got there yet. You look at the way we treat each other, the way we treat young people, the way we treat, the way we organize our society. We clearly haven't got advanced toward anything that anybody else wants to emulate. And so don't even look at it that way. So Black Studies points that out, that America is in process and we haven't arrived yet. And until you understand where we are in this history of peoples of different colors, then you won't have an accurate picture of the world that you're living in. The third thing is, and this is what Black Studies is for, it's not just for Black people. If you're a human being living on this planet and move out of your neighborhood, if it's an all-white neighborhood, you will encounter people of color. It'd be a very good idea to figure out how to get along with them. It might even save your job. It might even get you a job. It might make you happier on your job. If you're an engineer and get assigned to work in Nigeria, it might be a good thing to know something about Africa before you get there. And don't get off the plane and say people talk funny and dress funny because you just lost your engineering contract. So it's not altruism that we teach the history of Black people. It's to help white Americans understand how they can live in a world where they're not the dominant population. And I know it's difficult trying to get off the kind of high horse about what we think we are, but the reality is that people of European descent are a small percentage of the world's population, and we all have to make adjustments so we can all get along and live together without destroying the planet and destroying each other. And that's the short version of why you need Black Studies. Well, how did I get to this point? Well, I had the advantage, or some would say the disadvantage, of growing up under Jim Crow. Born in 1941, and I went to segregated schools all the way up till high school. I grew up on a college campus, Howard University. People don't know much about historically Black institutions, but Howard University is what people at Howard call the capstone of Negro education, now Black education. If you're not familiar with Howard, I'll mention just a couple of alums to capture your attention. Toni Morrison, Amir Baraka, Roxy Rokolinick Pavich's mother, Roberta Flack, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Chadwick Boseman, and Kamala Harris. So whatever Howard was, it's certainly not a place that turns out people of inferior quality. It turns out people who, in fact, have made a tremendous contribution to the society as a whole. And it might be a good idea to look at people coming out of those institutions not as, my God, how did they make it? But my God, why can't we send our kids there? There's something going on there. What I learned growing up in Jim Crow, Washington, D.C., automatically as part of my environment was that there was a broader struggle and a broader contribution of Black people to the world that wasn't even taught in the classroom. It was just taught in the names of the school. I went to Lucretia Mott Elementary School. You could be stopped in the hallway by Mrs. Brown. She was the principal, and she would stop you and say, "Who is Lucretia Mott?" Say she's an abolitionist. Well, what do abolitionists do? They help free the slaves. Now you can go to class. If you don't know that, you have to stand in front of an office till somebody tells you what Lucretia Mott did. That means you're forced to deal with the reality of a white abolitionist. So you have to know who Lucretia Mott is. It's not in the curriculum. It's in your head every day. Otherwise, you can't get down the hallway past the principal's office, right? I went to Benjamin Banneker Junior High School, right? People say that Black people are later in the STEM fields. Benjamin Banneker was a scientist. He helped lay out, the design for Washington, D.C. with Pierre L'Enfant. Right? Even Thomas Jefferson acknowledged that he was a great scientist. Jefferson had doubts about his ancestry. He said he's kind of too smart to be really Black, so he must have some European in there. But he did not doubt Benjamin Banneker's skill as a scientist. Right? So I knew that Black people could do something just by looking at the names of the schools that I walked around and I went into. On the campus of Howard University was named after General O.O. Howard, who was the head of the Freedmen's Bureau. Right? The school was started with money from the American Missionary Association, which was money left over from the Amistad Revolt. And at the end of the Civil War, they formed a lot of Black colleges, Howard, Tougaloo, Talladega, Lemoyne, Fisk. Right? Again, historically Black schools. Right? My mother's office was in Douglas Hall. What Douglas Hall? Frederick Douglass Hall. Why is it named after Frederick Douglass? Because he was on the board of trustees of Howard University. I am learning all of this just by osmosis almost. I don't have to go look for these things. I walk into Douglas Hall, there's a picture of Frederick Douglass, right? I sit in my mother's office when I'm growing up, coming up from my school, doing my homework in the corner. She's got an office on the second floor, it's still there. They redoing the building. Who's in the English department walking in to chit chat with her? Sterling Brown, a great poet. If you don't know Sterling Brown, go read him. If you want to know something about Aunt Lois Maria Jones, will stick her head in. She's a very accomplished, one of the leading, most accomplished Black artists in the 20th century. The history faculty included John Hope Franklin. The sociology department included E. Franklin Frazier. Right? These are the people I am surrounded by, right? Who make jokes with me, help me with my homework. Sterling Brown would lean over and tell me, put a comma right here, otherwise your sentence doesn't make any sense. Franklin Frazier would make jokes about the other faculty. When they wrote books, they gave me copies of these books when I was too young to read them, and I would say, this is a big fat book. They say, hold on to it, you'll get to it eventually, right? So it never ever occurred to me that Black people couldn't accomplish things. You walk over to the chapel, you have the dean of the chapel is Howard Thurman, one of the leading theologians of the 20th century. There's no inferiority anywhere around here, right? It's just, where's inferiority gonna be, right? You go down to Freedman's Hospital and the head surgeon at Freedman Hospital is Charles Drew, right? Invented blood plasma, right? He's the one that if you break your finger on the playground, that's who puts the splint on it, Charles Drew. Not an intern. You walk in there and Dr. Drew says, what did you do this time? And say, well, I sprained it at the playground. I said, stick the hand in this thing, I'll put it back together for you, right? One of the leading doctors in the 20th century. So it never, ever occurred to me that Black people were inferior. What we learned was that there was a society that didn't recognize what we contributed, right? And we had to learn how to deal with that. So the advantage I had growing up under Jim Crow is we had to learn all of Western civilization. Plus we also learned what we knew, right? So I thought I had a better education. I still believe that, So I can do Shakespeare. I know about Ira Aldridge and Paul Robeson, who still has the longest running Shakespeare play on Broadway. Today still has, Othello, right? I can say, hush you a word before I go. You have done this state some service and I know it, right? Or I can say, went to the sessions of sweet silent thought, I sum up remembrances of things past. I can do some Shakespeare. Friends, Romans, and countrymen, lend me your ears. I can do that, but I can also do Dunbar. An angel robed in spotless white, bent down to kiss the sleeping night. Night woke to blush, the sprite was gone. Men saw the blush and called it dawn. White kids can only do Shakespeare if they get Shakespeare. They can't do Dunbar. I can do Shakespeare and Dunbar. I can do, shall I compare thee to a summer day? But I also do Langston Hughes. Life for me ain't been no crystal stair, right? Who's got the advantage? Who's got the advantage? Who's learning, who's not learning? I studied the violin. I can do European culture. I studied 10 years under Louis Jones. Langston Hughes talks about him in The Big C. Du Bois said he was the greatest Negro violinist of the 20th century, right? 10 years, European music. I can do Beethoven. I was first chair, concert master. I can do that, right? But the other times, when I'm not doing that, not practicing, where am I? I'm at the Howard Theater. Who am I listening to? B.B. King, Howlin' Wolf, Aretha Franklin, right? Who's got the advantage? Who's got the advantage, right? So I can do Beethoven. I can do Bach, I can do Stravinsky, right? But can also do Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, and so forth. Who's trapped? Who's culturally deprived? Not us, not us. Who comes to us for culture, right? So if I sit there today and say, nobody knows the trouble I've seen, that's the spiritual. You know that's the spiritual, right? Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. We don't know the people, the Black people that produced those songs. Slaves, anonymous slaves produced music we still know today. Like, you cannot name me one song written by a slaveholder. There's not one painting painted by a slaveholder. There's no culture that comes out of slaveholders. The culture that we hold on to today, that we love today, that's fundamental to American life today, came out of the slave population. We define popular culture in 20th century America. We don't look to Elvis Presley to get our music. Elvis Presley looks to us, right? We don't go over to hear Pat Boone sing a song. Pat Boone comes to listen to us, right? And today you live in a world where there is no youth culture that is not hip hop, right? Young Black people with no resources whatsoever, no music, no marching band, no music teachers, drag some old 33 and the thirds, put them on a turntable, started twisting them around, and have a form that has dominated the world for the past 40 years. It is on every planet. Right? Now, you can denigrate the people that make that, but you can't deny the importance of African American culture to American culture. And if you're talking about young white students, I will bet you, and I'm willing to bet a lot of money on this, that if Black people disappeared, they would still listen to Black music. If there are no Black people on Maine's campus, when they have spring concert, they want to bring some hip hop up. They want a rapper up there, right? They don't want a white guy singing something. No, they said they want the real music, Black music. They know that. White people know that. Like, we're not a sidelight to American society. We're foundational to American society. Like, the gift we're given. Du Bois talked about the gift of Black folk. We're not incidental. There was slavery in every single colony. The 13 colonies all had slaves. All of them, every last one. It's not a Southern thing, right? It's a British expansion thing. Like, some people got rid of them early, because you had the North and the South, but there was slavery everywhere. We were not incidental to American economic development. We were the capital under capitalism. At the time of the Civil War, there was more money put in slave labor than in industry and in banks and in railroads and in anything else going on in this country. $2 billion. $2 billion worth of slave labor. Right? We were the factories. We were the workers. Right? And we didn't get a penny for that. Right? Imagine how much money you can make if you get people to work for 250 years and don't pay them. And then you come in and walk into a building they built and say, look what we did. Look what we did. He ain't do that. Thomas Jefferson didn't lay a brick at Monticello. He said, I think I have a pretty building. And the slaves built it. And everybody knows the difference between the architect's drawing and what the workers put up. Right? You can draw anything you want on a sheet of paper, and the carpenter says, that's not going to work. The ceiling will fall down the way you got it, but we'll fix it for you. Black people built Monticello. Black people built the Washington Monument. Black people built the Capitol. Black people built the White House. Right? We built the railroads. Right? We're not incidental. We're foundational to American society. We're not on the outside. We're the indispensable base for American society. And if you want to just look at the expansion of the United States, you just have to look at another denigrated group of Black people. They're Haitians. This country would have stopped at the Mississippi River except for Toussaint Louverture, Andre Christophe, and Jacques Dessalines in the San Domingo Revolution. Right? Thomas Jefferson gets credit for getting the Louisiana Purchase. Why is Napoleon dumping the Louisiana Purchase on him with his discount? Because after they lose San Domingo, he doesn't care about anything in the Western Hemisphere. The money was made in San Domingo. Right? Once they lost that, Napoleon said, bail out on the rest of that, whatever it is, see if you get whatever you can get for it, give it to them. Right? Then nobody even knew what it was. That's why he had to send Lewis and Clark out there to figure out what it. Nobody even knew what it was. But it was French when you crossed the Mississippi River. It's Toussaint Louverture that should get credit for everything from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean, not Thomas Jefferson. But who talks about Haiti? Who talks about Toussaint Louverture? Black people do. Right? When I grew up, when I was in elementary school, the one person I wanted to play during the Negro History Month week play was Toussaint, because we got to rehearse the Haitian Revolution every February. And Toussaint wore that big crown. He had a sword and everything. It's really cool. The best I could get was to be Desert Lane, who stood next to Toussaint. But, you know, because all the kids' parents probably had more depth than my parents had. But I knew who he was. White people don't know who Toussaint Louverture is. They say, we know about Napoleon. He beat Napoleon. We know about George Washington. No. Washington said, why don't we go there and try to stifle the Haitian Revolution? Toussaint said, come on. Washington said, well, we'll just kind of leave that alone for a while. They said, come on. They defeated every army in Europe, every army. Napoleon lost the bulk of his troops in San Domingo, dead. Then Wellington beats what's left. And they say, oh, Wellington defeated him at the Battle of Waterloo. No. Toussaint beat him in San Domingo. But they don't teach you that. That's what Black Studies is. It puts you at the center of history, you know, American history, and everything else grows from around it, interacts with that, you know. Now, of course, we're not Africans because the slave trade ended in 1800. So everybody, the majority of the slave population in 1860 was born in the United States, right? So we don't speak African languages as African languages, but we had a sensibility. Right? We had a set of values we brought with us. And you have this strange notion that people say, well, everybody lost everything they had. They got on the boat ride, and they came all the way across the ocean in the Middle Passage, and they got off the other side, and they didn't know anything about anything. How many people have been on a boat ride to go from here to London or somewhere? Do you forget your language on the boat? Do you forget your values on the boat? Do you forget who you are on the boat? No. You adjust. If you can't speak French, when you get off in France, you learn how to speak French, right? You're not lost. You just have to adjust. We adjusted. We said, okay, where are we? We're surrounded by people. They don't understand us. We adjust. We learn their words. You know, we take their symbols. They try to give us a certain version of Christianity. And they said, oh, no. We're the Hebrew children. We got this. Y'all talking smack over here. We're not just render under Caesar what is Caesar's. No, we ain't going with that one. Serve and obey your master. No, we're not going with that. We're going under. We're the Hebrew children. We're the ones in bondage, right? That's why we call our leaders Moses. That's why we're saying, go down Moses, tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. That's who we are. That's how we got through slavery, because we knew that we were going to come out of that. We didn't know when, but we knew we would raise up leaders who we would call Moses. We don't care whether they're male or female. That's a Western thing. Harriet Tubman was Moses. People say, well, she's a woman. So what? She's a leader. Leader is Moses, right? We're not tied in the Western forms of patriarchy. We have our own versions of it, but it certainly does not exclude women from leadership. So Black men and women followed Harriet Tubman. Today, when you said who should be on the $20 bill, Black people didn't say Frederick Douglass, they say Harriet Tubman. It wasn't even a contest. It wasn't a contest. Black men didn't say, well, how come you didn't put a brother on there? No, Harriet Tubman. She's number one. Everybody knows that. She's the most popular figure in 19th century America. Right? You know, that's what people don't know. So you say, well, what is about the history of women in the country and gender equality? Harriet Tubman. If you don't know Harriet Tubman or Ida B. Wells, or Mary McLeod Bethune, you don't know the history of women in this country. You know, you don't know Mary McLeod Bethune ran a co-ed Black college in the 1920s. It took to the 1970s and 80s for a white female to head a co-ed college. You know, when I came to the Pioneer Valley in 1972, Smith College had a male president, a male. They didn't get a breakthrough to get a female president of Smith College, except in my lifetime, my academic lifetime. Right? Black people had schools run by women a long time ago. Lucy Laney, you know, Charlotte Hawkins Brown. You know, we don't hold ourselves back because we don't have enough people, and we need all of the help we can get. And we come out of a culture that has women in leadership that we look up to, and we hold on to that. It's got nothing to do with matriarchy. It's got nothing to do with some kind of deformation of Western society and how come the women have more power. It has to do with how African societies are organized, which we remember. right? Who handles the culture, who raises the kids, who sets the values, who calls the men, to fight. That's what Black Studies will teach you, how to look at the world in a different way, how to look at relationships in a different way, how to understand, and when you look around you, that they don't talk funny, they talk differently. Like the words that you use might be words that are African you may not even know. Like a lot of young white men might call themselves Bubba. Bubba is an African word. It's a Gullah word. Comes out of Congo. It's a Congo word. Comes out of Congo, Angola. Sea Islands, Gullah people. Georgia, South Carolina. Okra. It's an African word. Tater's an African word. Goober is an African word. You said you eat peanuts, you eat goober. Down south they call them goobers. It's an African word. We speak African, we think African, we act African. We just don't know it. We have to learn it. Right? But it's there in the way we interact with things. You go into a Black church, North America, you have a lot of people from Congo, so we don't have a hierarchy. So we don't have a lot of priests and stuff stacked up. People talk to God anytime they want to because in Africa, the spirit is everywhere. Congo people, the spirit is everywhere. It's in you. It's not out there. You don't have to have somebody explain it to you. It's in you. So my grandmother could talk to Jesus while she's baking biscuits in the kitchen. She don't have to be in church. God talks to her when she needs God to talk to her, and she listens when God talks to her. She doesn't say, I have to hold that to Sunday. She says, no. And I learned that as a young child when I'm sitting there, in the living room when I'm like 4 or 5 years old, and my grandmother starts to cry, and I said, what are you crying about? She said, it's Jesus talking to me and I'm feeling good. Right? And I'm looking around, I don't see anybody, but that's not what it's all about. I said, well, that's Africa. That's what we consider. Black Studies get you to see that. We take English and make it into a language that is a little bit different from the way white people use it. We take the original English, 16th century English. If you want to hear people talk Bible talk, King James Bible talk, go to a Black church. Black preachers still hold on to that. They don't want the newfangled Bible that straightens the words out. They want to hear the words that their ancestors heard when they got off the slave ship. 16th, 17th century English, King James Bible. That's what they hear. That's why they like Shakespeare. That's what they heard coming over on the slave ships. That's the language, right, of the masters in the 15th and 16th century. That way you can understand why the leading Shakespearean actors in the history of this country are Black people. There are 2 people in Shakespeare's Hall of Fame, Stratford and Avon. The first one is Ira Aldridge in the 19th century, African-American. Right? Couldn't do Shakespeare here, had to go to Europe. He's the first American that got elected into the Shakespeare Hall of Fame. Right? Who does Othello like nobody ever did Othello? Paul Robeson. Right? Again, 3,000 performances of Othello in the 1940s, early 1940s. 3,000. Nobody's ever come anywhere near that. Not in blackface, not Laurence Olivier Robeson. Like, who did the British get to read Shakespeare on the 500th anniversary of Shakespeare? George Lamming from Barbados. Why? Because he sounds like what Shakespeare would have sounded like. Mm-hmm. Like, that's our contribution. That's what Black Studies is all about. It's not about how we're out there, it's how we're inside. We're inside the West. I was born in Chicago. I wasn't born in Africa, I was born in Chicago. Like, I feel this walking up and down the streets in Chicago. I hear the way people talk walking down the streets in Chicago. I go to a church, I go to a meeting. Like, you see how people organize themselves, how they look after each other, how they make adjustments for each other, how if somebody has too many kids, somebody else takes them in. Whether you have welfare or not. There are no orphans in Black communities under slavery. 25% of the slave families got broken up. There were no orphans. When you went to the next plantation, people took you in. They said, come on, you're part of our family now. That's why Black people can't get their relatives straight. They say, that's your cousin. Well, who is he related? Don't worry about it. That's your cousin. That's your uncle. I didn't know you had a brother. Don't worry about it. That's your uncle. That is somebody you took in that needed to be taken in because you didn't leave a young kid out there by themselves with no mother, because these are the people that would say, sometimes I feel like a motherless child, but take them in so you don't feel that way anymore. That's an African sensibility that Americans ought to learn how to carry out. That should be the foundation of how you organize the care of children. Like, if you look at a Black family, kids are the priority. The youngest are the priority. You feed the children first. Everybody else comes later. You look at the way we organize schools. We talk about how we love students and teachers, but we pay teachers crap, right? We don't put money in the schools. You know, kids stay home now. People have their kids at home for a month and say, take them back to school. It's too much trouble to look after them. The teacher looks after them every day. And then you want to argue about how come they want more money. They should get $1 million a year because they're looking after your kids, because they're the most important thing in the world. But we don't value young people. We just say they do. Black people value young people. You know, we try to save them. If you have $1, you give 50 cents to the kids so they eat first, and then you split up that stuff. Right? Those are values that are here and among us that make this country different from what it is. You know, that's where we are. You know, that's what we contribute. Black Studies teaches that. You don't have to agree with all of that. You can get into details about things. You can argue about the multiplicity of blackness now because we have African immigrants. We got people from Brazil. We got people from all over the Western Hemisphere. And so black is not just a color. Black is a sensibility and a historic experience. What we share is a degradation on the part of the West. That's what we all know we share. It doesn't matter where you come from, right? It doesn't matter where you say, well, I wasn't a slave, yeah, but you were colonized. You're not speaking the African language. When you walk up to me on the street, you say, I'm from Nigeria. You're telling me that in English. You're not speaking Igbo to me, because I can't speak Igbo. And if you're born in the Bronx, you can't speak Igbo either. You know, like I got African students to say, I'm a Wolof. Can you speak Wolof? Oh, no, my parents speak Wolof. Well, you speak. He got a hat on backwards. He got his Timberlands on. You know, he got his Eddie Bauer jacket. He speak hip hop, right? The universal language. Right? It doesn't mean he's not an African. It means he's an African American in a complicated kind of way. It doesn't matter whether you speak Spanish or not. So what? The slaveholders spoke different languages. It had nothing to do with us. You know, you put kids on the playground, they can learn Spanish in 5 minutes. So they don't learn language. Go to any playground in the city where you got Puerto Ricans and blacks together. They talk to each other. They know who won the basketball game. Right? They know how much money somebody owes them in whatever language you want to argue it out. That's what Black Studies will teach you, you know, that we are complicated people, but we are an American people, and we define a lot of what America is. And the failure to look at that, to try to throw that away and ignore that and say we're really a white country, will leave you with people walking around with Confederate flags, but they can't sing a song. They can't dance. Don't know how to live, right? Don't know how to get along without anything, you know, to make something out of nothing, right? Which we had to learn how to do under slavery and after Jim Crow. That's what Black Studies does. And you come in that, and we want it in one department because we don't separate people into your economic life over here, your historical life over here, your literary life over here. We want to teach people as a human being. So we want all the disciplines in one space, you know. So in my department, you know, when Sonia got here and we met together back at 50 years ago, I can walk out of my office and I want to think music. I got Max Roach next to me. I got Archie Shepp across the hall. 5 years later, I got James Baldwin. I said, Jimmy, tell me about, you know, how do you do this? How you do that? Well, I got Dan and Moments coming in talking about Dan. I want them right there. I don't want them cross campus. I want them right there so that the Black student can walk into that experience and know who they are and know that they are somebody. Right? So you don't look at that sister and think she's unusual. She's just the one we found. There's a lot like her we haven't found yet because we think Black people can't do that. She shows you can do that. And again, she's the sister, you know, Amanda Gorman. She's trained in sociology. She's a great poet. She did that on her own. She didn't go to the MFA program. She came out of her experience and put that together in overwhelming beauty and power, right? Without having to write 25 different passages in a class in English about somebody just trying to tell you how to make your stuff sound like their stuff. Black Studies lets you do that. It teaches that. It teaches she's not an exception. She's just one we found. They're more like her, and we know that. You know, and they'll be at Howard, you know, like Ta-Nehisi Coates, or Chadwick Boseman, you know, or Kamala Harris, you know, they'll be at Morehouse, like, you know, Martin Luther King Jr. You know, that's where they're coming from, right? Or they'll come out of Fisk like W.B. Du Bois, right? Cody come out of Fisk, but then he goes to Harvard, right? Or they'll be like Stacey Abrams, who goes to Spelman, and then she can take over Georgia, right? She didn't go to Emory, right? She didn't go to Georgia Tech. She went to Spelman. She's a Spelman grad. But she knows how to run the state of Georgia, knows how to get 2 people in the Congress. knows how to run a president out of office, right? You learn that at Spelman. You didn't learn the techniques somewhere else, but it's that Black experience that grounds you. And you want everybody to participate in that. So it's open to anybody that comes. Black schools have always been integrated. Howard was integrated from day one. Black people open up a school that's for everybody, right? There's no discrimination, right? And so Black studies is not just for Black people, right? It's not to make us feel good. It's to make everybody understand the world in which you live and the place of Black people in it. And I'm gonna cut off now because Sonia's looking like she's warmed up over there. And I'm gonna segue into my partner in crime these many, many years, who will carry on for the next time period. Thank you very much.
It is such an honor to be here, but it's a real honor to be here with Professor Bracy, because each time I listen to him, this great historian, this person I met at a place called Amherst, and I still see us on a hill when we had come out of a meeting and we both looked at each other and we said to each other, how can we make Black studies continue up here and be recognized? And we both said, we've got to get a graduate program. It can no longer be undergrad. And I remember standing on that hill saying, that's it. And to see your department, Brother John, is a joy. And to know that, many of us figured that out here in America, to have not only an undergrad, but also a graduate program, is to see so many people that we've taught graduate and go into these many colleges and become chairpersons of departments and continue to perpetuate the ideas simply that we as African Americans, brought to education something that made education change in spite of itself. It's an amazing thing what it did, because from Black studies came women's studies, Jewish studies, Chicano studies, Puerto Rican studies, Asian studies. All of that came from something called Black studies, because we decided to change this educational system. And they didn't take to it happily at all. But I am reminded that when we began to teach Black studies, it was the first one at San Francisco State. Someone said, if you need someone to teach the Black literature, you should contact that Sanchez woman. She's always talking about somebody Black who writes. And that was true, because I had graduated from Hunter College in January, and I had just turned 20. And my father said, well, you need to get a job also, Sonia. And I said, okay, Dad. And so I started answering ads from the New York Times and all these newspapers. And I go and they said, the job is filled. And so I used to come home and I said, Dad, this is going to be hard. Well, eventually he got the Sunday Times for me. And there was this ad that said they needed someone to write for their firm. Would I send an example of my writing and a CV? And so I did all that, and I got a telegram. I think I sent it out on a Monday, and I got a telegram on the Saturday. Some of you don't know what telegrams are, but they used to be like these little yellow things that they would deliver on Saturdays in the morning after they rang your bell, and you open it up. Mine said, report to work at 9 a.m. I went, whoa, I got that. I said, Dad, look at here. Guess what? Look at here. And he read the telegram. He looked at me. He read the telegram. He looked at me and said, well, you're probably going to end up teaching. But I put on my blue suit the next day and my blue heels. And I had this hat sitting acey-deucey in my blue purse and my white gloves, and I showed up at 8:30. I was not going to do CP time. I showed up at 8:30 and nobody was there yet. And all of a sudden, down the hallway, I heard these clicking of heels. Was this young woman, and she said, yes, can I help you? And I took out my telegram and handed it to her. She read the telegram and she looked at me. She read the telegram and she looked again at me. And she read the telegram for a third time and looked at me and handed it back and said, well, I'll unlock the door. You come inside, have a seat. She sat down, she disappeared, she came back. She took off the cover of a typewriter. Some of you might not know what a typewriter is. And she pulled some work out and started to type. And I'm sitting there at 1:45, a head comes around the corner and looks, you know, and then about 2 minutes later, another head came around the corner and looked. And all of a sudden, a man appeared at the door. He said, "Can I help you?" And I took the telegram out of my purse and stood up and handed it to him, all smiles. This is a 20-year-old smile, right, on my face. I've been 20 years old for, what, 3 months, right? I got a job, right, writing, can you imagine? And he looked at the telegram and he looked at me. He looked at the telegram and he looked at me. He looked at the telegram and looked at me and handed it back and said, "I'm sorry, the job is taken." I said, oh, I'm from New York. I said, "I got it. I know you said, the telegram says report to work at 9. I got here at 8:30. I'm gonna go outside. When it gets to be 9 a.m., I will re-enter and everything will be okay." He didn't smile. He said, "Lady, I said the job is taken." And I realized what was happening. And I said, "Oh, I get it. It's discrimination. I'm going to report you to the Urban League." And he shrugged his shoulders and went out the door. And I remember taking off my hat, going out the door, tears in my eyes, taking off my gloves, whatever. Got on the train. Any of you know New York City. If you're going to stay on the West Side, you've got to stay on the #1 train. Otherwise, you're going to end up on the East Side. And I'm sitting there and the door closes at 96th Street, 95th Street. And all of a sudden the train begins to shake mightily. And I look up and we're on the East Side. And I realize I'm going to have to get off at 135th Street, which I do, cross the street, get about maybe a quarter into the block, and I see a guy outside smoking cigarettes very fast, and a sign says Schaumburg. And I stopped the man and said, "Sir, what is the Schaumburg?" He said, lady, go inside, sign in, go up the steps, and you will see." So I signed this little book, went inside, and came into this vast room with a very long table and nothing but men, mostly Africans from the continent, sitting there with stacks of books. And there was this glass door, and I passed by them looking at them. They never looked up. And I knocked on the glass door. And Miss Jean Hudson, opened the door. She said, "Yes, dear." I told her my name. I said, "Could you tell me, please?" And she gave me her name. She said, "My name is Mrs. Jean Hudson." I said, "Glad to meet you. Can you possibly tell me what is the Schaumburg?" She said, "Oh, my dear, the Schaumburg is a library that has books only by and about Negroes." And I said with my fast, fresh mouth, I said, "There must not be many books in here, huh?" She never let me forget that. Every time I brought my students from Amherst, from Philadelphia, wherever I was, New Jersey, to the Schaumburg, she would say to them, "I have a story to tell you about your professor," you know, and I would disappear to the back of the room, and all my students turned around and said, "Oh, we got something on you now, Professor Sanchez." That is the reality of that place. And so she set me down. She went over to all these men. She asked them to move over. She pushed a chair there and she said, "Just wait for me." And I'm sitting there 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and finally at 20 minutes, she brought 3 books: Up from Slavery, Souls of Black Folk, and Their Eyes Are Watching God. That was on top. And I just took it from the top and I started to read it. And you know how difficult it is to read Black English. It is, when you teach it, it is not dialect, it is Black English. Remember that, okay? And I began, and by the time my ears and my tongue became accustomed to it, I was crying. I eased out and I knocked on the glass door and she came. I said, "But how could I be a graduate of Hunter College, right, and never came across this book?" She said, "Oh, my dear, go sit down and read some more. I'm going to bring you lots and lots of books." And I went and eased in and continued to read. And when I got to about a third of the book, I started to cry. I love the idea that the English language has more words for crying than just cry. I was sobbing, actually. And I eased out and I knocked on the door. Whew. And I said to her, but no, how could I call myself an educated young woman and I don't know these books? And she says, oh, you will know them all during the summer. If you come, I will give you these books. And as I inched back in, this African scholar said, Miss Hudson, tell this young woman either she sits still or she has to leave. And I sat still for the rest of that semester. I told my dad every day, I'm going out to look for a job. And I went to the Schomburg and she fed me book after book after book. And the amazing thing is that when I was really going to start this job later on, I had to go in for some classes and things. She gave me the name of Mr. Michaud. And she said, he has something for you. And Mr. Michaud had a bookstore at 125th Street. And I went there and he had 2 bags, and not shopping bags like we have now, but 2 bags like grocery bags. And they were full of Black books, right? You know, and I mean, I had to take a cab home. He said, I better get you a cab. And I remember going in the house with these books and I took them and threw them, opened them and just put them all over my bed in my bedroom and just sat there and just went through each one, you know, just relishing. But then she also gave me the name of Mr. Richard Moore, who had a bookstore about a block down the street with Caribbean books. And I remember when I walked into his bookstore the next day, I always say that bookstore was so narrow, right, that you had to go in sideways. But that's an exaggeration. That is, you know, a story like many of us tell as Black folks, right? And as I walked in, he was on one of those rollers and he was up high and he said, yes, and I jumped, you know, and I am an ex-stutterer. So he said, what do you want? And I said, get it out. He said, speak up, girlie. And I said, Miss Hudson sent me, oh, you're the one. She told me about you, right? And he had 2 bags of books, people, right, also. And he said, if you want to hear some important work, come out, we're having a meeting. You know, he would have these students from the Caribbean, right, who would come in and give lectures. And I would come out. That's how I began to go in and listen to those lectures. That is the reality. So in New York Core, you know, people would mention a book, and I said, well, have you read the following? And they said, oh, girl, you're always talking about those Black books. I said, yeah, but you should know them because they're important for us. And we began something called Black Studies in a place called San Francisco State, you know, in the mid-1960s. I was the one chosen to teach Black literature and writing, creative writing, because who else had all those books? And when we got to a place called San Francisco, what did we do? We had all the students type Souls of Black Folk excerpts from it, right? All of Kane, right, on that blue stuff. What is that stuff called? You know, it wasn't Xerox.
Was that the Gestetner machines?
Yeah, you know the little
mimeograph machine with that.
Yeah, our hands were forever blue. You know, honestly, they never got clean, but the students typed up all of these, you know, excerpts from Souls of Black Folk also too, you know, and all of Kane, a little book, you know, and all the sayings of Marcus Garvey, because we got it from Richardson's bookstore at a place called San Francisco, because we're at San Francisco State. And in my class, we were not just learning how to write, my dear brothers and sisters. I was also taking them to that bookstore, Mr. Michaud's bookstore, and they had to learn how to put out a paper. You know, they had to learn how to put out, you know, a journal, whatever. They did the typing for Mr. Michaud, for Brother Richardson in San Francisco. They were allowed at some point under my direction to read some of the poems out loud and decide which ones also would be, because they were not only there to learn how to write, but they were also learning how to, what do you do with that writing? You know, how do you encourage people? They also learn how to type, you know, when we said we cannot use this right now at this time, but keep sending. That was the reality of Black studies. You were not only in the classroom, but you were out of the classroom. When Black history came, my students went into the high schools and taught those students how to, what this Black history was all about. So that was important. And they would come and invite them to the campus on a Wednesday. That's one of the ways that we gathered people to come into what we were doing to learn about Black studies. We fed people every Wednesday, Wednesday at 12 o'clock. We made food, whatever, and students will show up for food. But after they ate, we asked them to sit down, and we would also then have people read poetry, read sections, whatever. And that's how we got people to be involved, because what we said is that we not only care about what's here, but we also care about what's here at the same time. And if we get those two places, we got you, you know, and we know that you will then begin to learn what we want you to learn. My dear brothers and my dear sisters, when I told my father I was going to San Francisco to begin something called Black Studies, he said, oh my God, why can't you just not settle down, right? Move to Long Island someplace, right? And stop this traveling. He said, why don't you just teach what's in, you know, just teach. That literature that you learn, just teach it. And I said, Dad, if I do that, then I can't teach. What I want to teach is I want people to feel when they walk into a classroom, they have a history and a history. I want to teach that history and that history. I want them to know that when I walked into a classroom the first time, when people were sitting, sharing seats, by the way, people pulled up chairs in the doorway. It was really a mob scene on many levels. Some of them were not registered at all. I went around the room, the blackboard was all the way around the room, and I wrote all the names on the board that I knew from writers, political people, whatever. Only two names I recognized, MLK and Malcolm. And I said, don't worry. At the end of the semester, you will know a lot of people, and they did. And so that's the kind of history and history that we had there at a place called San Francisco State. Kay Ball, who is a writer with Hemingway, a very amazing woman, amazing writer, you know, you can Google her, an amazing white writer, an amazing human being. We were very close. She was the chairperson of the English department. I came out of the English department into Black Studies in order to teach. And the only thing we differed on was one thing, and that was the brother who came to manage that great organization, the Black Panther Party. He had just gotten out of jail. He wrote a book called Soul on what is it? Was it Soul on Ice?
Yes, Soul on Ice.
Right. That was the only disagreement we had, you know, amongst everything else. But there we were teaching students about themselves. She would write an amazing chapter from her book about teaching Black students how to love themselves, teaching Black students to see themselves as human beings. Whoa. Teaching Black students what it means to walk in the university, teaching Black students to write about what they know, that was themselves, you know, it was they that they wrote about, whatever, you know, teaching and creative writing, you know, what it means to walk upright as a human being and to say, I am human, sucker. That's what I be, whatever, you know, and leave me alone if you don't think that's the case. So one of the things I wanted to read was from this great book that our dear brother Bracy Smethurst and I did, because there was no other book, no other reader on Black on Black studies or on Black lit after the book that Larry Neal and at that time Leroy Jones, Amiri Baraka put out called Black Fire. And we said amongst ourselves, we need a book, you know, for people, because people were calling Professor Bracy constantly about, come tell us about Black studies, tell us this, whatever. And we finally said, we need a book, you know, so they can buy this book, the students can read this book, they can see. And the great thing about this book is that we didn't take favorites. You know, we said, this is what people did, right or wrong, reading about it. So of course, many of us could say, well, leave out something that I said that maybe is not correct today or was really, really hard. I said, no, put it in. People got to know simply how angry we were. We didn't go around starting riots. We didn't go around hurting people and beating people up. But our mouths, said, you said that about me. Let me show you how to assassinate somebody with my tongue, right? And that's what we did with our words and our poetry, which was an amazing kind of thing. So let me read to you, if I may, the poetry of the Babb, Meditation, Critique, and Praise. Franz Fanon said, what is needed is to hold oneself like a sliver to the heart of the world, to interrupt, if necessary, the rhythm of the world, to upset, if necessary, the chain of command ellipsis, but to stand up to the world. I do battle for the creation of a human world that is a world of reciprocal recognition. We knew that this would not be a place just for Blacks. We knew the moment that it was put out there, students would go back into the dorms and you know what I'm studying? And we knew that Black studies would be open up to everyone. That much we knew, but we had to start with the base there to get people to come in. Jose Marti wrote, in the world, there must be a certain degree of honor, just as there must be a certain degree of light. When there are many women without honor, there are always others who bear in themselves the honor of many men and women, end of quote. How to tell you of peace, change, hope, of racial and sexual and economic injustice, of an America rising up out of an aristocracy of death, an aristocracy of slavery, racism, an aristocracy of color, an aristocracy of corporate greed, an America that made Langston Hughes write, we the people must redeem our land and make America, America again. How to tell you about lives running on hairpins of a country needing parts from people to live. Step right up, I say, step right up. A good cell on legs today, eyes today, hands today, kidneys today, hearts today, history, herstory today, integrity today, truth today, families today. How to tell you of a country that will not recognize the two most important revolutions that were rooted in a cultural base, Cuba and Haiti. These two countries symbolize a regional process of struggle and liberation of the mind, which must be an essential part of our journey towards the fulfillment of the Western integrity. How to tell you of progress, so we move beyond a politician saying Cuba and Haiti, and everyone has the automatic voice of Washington shouting communism, continue the blockade, boat people, AIDS, poverty, but never the eloquent and graceful poetic voice of Marti, the spiritual father of the Cuban Revolution, who said, as he observed the conduct of the US delegation in 1889 at the Monetary Congress of the American Republic, and I quote, they believe in need, in the barbarous right as the only right. This will be ours because we need it. Almost 100 years late, after the invasion of Grenada by 6,000 US soldiers, the US Secretary of State, George Shultz, arrived, and his first observation was complete. He said, this is a delicious piece of real estate. This is a delicious piece of real estate. How to tell you of walking, climbing the citadel in Haiti, and hearing the footsteps of a people, a country crying out for liberty, economic justice, equality, and change. How to really make you understand that it's the poets as prophets, as teachers, as visionaries, as activists, as writers who sing of peace, racial and social and sexual and economic justice. How to make you remember Baraka in his 1965 poem, Black Art, declaring, we want poems that kill ellipsis. We want a Black poem of a Black world, or Larry Neal's, and there is jail. America is the world's greatest jailer, and we are all in jails. Black spirits contain little magnificent birds of wonder. How to make you remember James Baldwin, a man Baraka called God's Black revolutionary mouth, who said in 1979 in a New York Times article, if Black English isn't a language, then tell me what is. Baldwin said, it goes without saying that language is the most novel and crucial key to identity. It reveals the private identity. and connects one with or divorces one from the larger public or communal identity. How to make you hear your hearts pounding, sounding out what W.E.B. Du Bois wrote. This is a beautiful world. This is a wonderful America, which the founding fathers dreamed until their sons and daughters drowned it in the blood of slavery and devoured it in greed. How to make you remember the sister poets singing of the workers with words that had the scent of the earth and the genius of the stars. How to make you store in your blood the memory of Black women's voices, Jordan, Fields, Cortez, Clifton, Evans, Fabio, Angelo, Lord, Giovanni, Rogers, Sanchez, linking continents, making the country and the world abandon closed minds, spreading themselves rainbow-like across seas. Their voices stalking the morning stars as they helped a generation of young people begin to question their silence, their poverty, their scarcity, their greed. They helped us all ask the most important question we can ask ourselves. What does it mean to be human in the 20th and 21st century? What does it mean to be human? How to make you continue to lift your eyes off the ground and to a higher ground of living, of being, loving. How to make you remember the poets coming behind us in 1989, Public Enemy 1989, The Number, Another Summer, Get Down, sound of the funky drummer, music hitting your heart, cause I know you got soul. Gotta give us what we want, gotta give us what we need. Hey, our freedom of speech is freedom or death. We got to fight the power that be. Let me hear you say, fight the power, fight the power, fight the power. As James Stewart, the Black critic, wrote, man and woman cannot create a forever, but he can only create forever. But he can only create if she creates as change. Creation is itself perpetuation. Change is being. The question of art is dialectical. Art goes, art is not fixed, art cannot be fixed. Art is changed like music, poetry, and writing art when concerned. They must move, sway, not necessarily as physical properties, but by their nature. But they must go spiritually, as we people, lovers and workers of change, must go out into this world spiritually. And if we do, eBay, yee. If we do, eBay, if we do, eBay, it'll get better, it'll get better, it'll get better. You know, and that's a piece that I wrote for this book, which I thought was really important for us to see and have, and you know, and that kind of motion and movement that's important. I don't know what time is it, anyone? I didn't bring my clock with me.
So it's
I was trying to motion to Marani for it. Yes?
It's 7:05, so you're hitting your mark.
Say that again?
It's 7:05.
Uh-huh.
You're hitting your mark perfectly. If we can move into the Q&A session now.
Right, so do I do the poem at the end of the Q&A?
Right. I'll cue you in for the poem. Okay,
and let me just say one thing, okay, if I might, okay, because I had another piece, but let me just maybe end, you know, end it again, right? Let me just say, Sister Bernice Reagan told me one day about the great blues singer, Brother Montgomery, who said, we all come here naked. Black folks know it, but white folks don't know it because they come here white. White folks don't come here naked. Their skin is an additional currency, puts them far ahead. He continued, we all come here naked and must make arrangements for someone else while you're here, not just do for yourself. That's what these poets did. They made arrangements for someone else while they were here. This anthology will help us reintroduce our past blood to our present and future blood, make our memory re-enter our bloodstream in order to erase any death prints. Toni Morrison said we died. That may be the meaning of life, but we do language That may be the measure of our lives, and how Sister Tony and these poets do this thing called language, the measure of our lives, how they caress, embrace, untangle this language, recapture our memory, how they stand words up and let them minuet our blood, how they help us recover our silver words as they open up the sorcery of language, take us out into the wings of laughter and pain, intellect and beauty, how they commandeer words, spinning under this domestic sky, and they become a river moving against winter sails, repelling ice water ghosts, kneeling on razor thin knees at confession. Our bodies are tattooed forever with their quicksilver rhythms. We are one, alive, apart from the elasticity of the dead, the elasticity of the dead. Studying Black studies made us move away from the elasticity of the dead, made us see the world differently, because you cannot teach Black studies without also, as you study, what happened? I come into my classroom to teach my Black lit, and someone says, look what I found, Sonia. There's this poster. It's an old poster. It says, report to this particular place. It was supposed to for Japanese Americans to report to a place on a Monday to be sent to concentration camps. Isn't that amazing? That happened in our time. And what did I do? I turned to my two Japanese American students in the Black lit class, and I said, do you know anything about this? They got pissed at me. What? Concentration camps? Japanese? They completely almost left the class. I said, it's all right, I put it down. But at the end of our classes, Brother John knows that we always hold hands, right? And each one says something. And at the end, I said, I don't know if this is correct or not, but I hope you take these two little posters home with you and ask your parents if they know anything about this. And on Tuesday, when they returned to class, they had tears in their eyes. And the tears was about, they found out that their parents had been in concentration camps in a place. So Black Studies was the beginning of real discussion about what was going on in a place called America, as far as it was, as race was concerned, as far as literature was concerned, as far as education was concerned, as far as words were concerned, and humanity was concerned. We began the discussion about universities opening up for different people and having them come together and work together and read together and learn together and love together, and began to look at each other and say, hey, you're okay. You might not have the same hair I have, but you're okay. You're kind of nice looking. You're kind of cute, you know. You're not ooga booga 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 after all, as they say in those movies. You say, no, I'm more like, hey, how you be? Here I is. And here we is now. I hope that wasn't too long. Mm-hmm.
No, it's perfect. I think everyone is just grace.
Can I say one thing to the audience?
Yes. Professor
Bracy is, I love him because he is the most brilliant man that I know. You know, anytime I'm writing something and I can't get it and I've been looking for it, I bought a Professor, I said, John, can you tell me this? He said, oh, Sonia, that's the following. Thank God for John Bracy, right? You know, and that amazing mind, you know, he has that memory, you know, this man that anything he reads is right there and he can recall it for you. So it's an honor, Brother Bracy, again, to be working with you. Mm-hmm.
No, it's mutual. Mm-hmm. No.
So we have a couple questions that have come in during the duration of our program. I'll start with the question. This is for Dr. Bracy. Do other Western Hemisphere countries such as Brazil embrace similar courses that you were speaking of on history, if you know the answer?
No, what Black Studies in this country did was to inspire Black populations in the Western Hemisphere to begin to study themselves. Our department, we have a diasporic certificate program. We have in our doctoral program 4 or 5 kids from Colombia who have gone back to Colombia, which is the second largest Black population in the Western Hemisphere, and are starting Afro-Colombian studies. And they're translating Du Bois and they're translating it. And, you know, they call me up again, like Sonia says, once a week saying, what should we get out in Colombia? Cuba now has Black studies. I wrote an introduction to C.L.R. James, the Black Japanese. The Cubans are translating Walter Rodney. The Cubans are translating Eric Williams. There's a movement with the, you know, the Afro-descendant movement, which is probably going to be the most powerful movement of Black people in the Western Hemisphere because of the numbers. You know, if Black people in Brazil understand they're Black people, that's a huge country. You're going to get a couple of 100 million people. This is not chump change here. And if you're talking about Colombia, Afro-Colombians who are aligned with indigenous Colombians, if they assert their rights as Afro-Colombians, they have like a whole country. You know, we're trying to get neighborhoods. You can buy whole countries here. That's why the U.S. wants to keep these places divided. That's why they got mad at Chavez when he talked about the unity of Colombian peoples, and why he sent Chucho over to the UN and to work in Africa and so forth. That's why they got mad at Che Guevara when he went to work in the Congo. You know, what does Cuba have to do with the Congo? That's where the Cuban slaves came from, Angola. You know, slaves came into Cuba up to 1899. So at the time of the Cuban revolutions, there were people in Cuba who were born in Africa. They weren't going to some alien country. They're going home. They're going to fight at home. If we understand that the diasporic nature of the African-American experience, all these things will come up and complicate Black studies, make Black studies richer and deeper. There's 1 million Nigerian immigrants in the United States. 1 million, right? And you got to fight with them time to time because they're still arguing Nigerian stuff. So, you know, we like Chinua Achebe. My Yoruba friends don't like Chinua Achebe because of Biafra. So I got to negotiate between Yoruba over here, Igbo over here. You know, the Senegalese are getting the whole thing about, I'm not Mandinka, I'm Walla. Well, so, okay, so now we got to deal with tribalism one more time, but that's okay. Hip hop makes everybody the same. If you notice, they all get up on the stage together. Mm-hmm. You know, they get on the stage together. There's a new, stronger Blackness coming out of the diasporic focus. And they look to the African-American population as the inspiration for that. I mean, people call me up from every country in Latin America to give them books to read, advice about things. How did they do what we did? Because if they can do what they did in their country, like in Colombia or Brazil, that's a powerful intellectual force in transforming the way we look at the Western Hemisphere, you know. Yeah. The religions and you know, there's more Africa in, you know, say like, you know, Candomblé and Santeria and so forth, which is they're African religions, you know. We don't study them that much. There's, you know, Black studies is not just about African Americans in North America. It's about people of African descent in Africa and outside of Africa, wherever they might be. Right? We started where we were because this is where we were. We didn't have the access and the resources to do beyond that. But when our department opened up, we had African scholars. We had Dobie Efese. We had Femi Richards. We had Michael Theobald, who started the department, was a Jamaican. We had Axel Lynch, who was a Trinidadian. We went into no tribal thing. That's how we got over here on the slave ships, that tribal thing. No. If you are suffering under racism, you're us. You know, you may not think you're us, and you say, well, I speak Spanish. That means that the slave master spoke Spanish. Why you want to hold on to that? You know, ain't nothing Black about, you know, you say your slaveholder was better than my slaveholder. Like, come on off that stuff. No. We have a unified world experience. Every continent you look at where there are people of color, Black, dark-skinned people, they happen to be at the bottom. This is not happenstance. Right? Now, some of them may not realize they're at the bottom, like our Dominican brothers and sisters still working on that, but they are, you know, and when they come to New York, nobody knows that they may not think that they're Black, but they can't get a cab in New York going uptown no faster than I can. You know, white racism makes Black people Black. You don't get to pick. You know, you don't get to stand on a corner and say, oh, I'm not Black American, I'm a warlock. The cab passes you right by. They don't know that. No. Racism will unify us. So I don't even get into arguments with students about that stuff. No, racism will make you Black. You know, it'll be a different type of Blackness, a deeper Blackness, but we're not a narrow thing. And Blackness is not a narrow thing. We're the people that, I mean, civilization came out of Africa. The first human beings just stood up and walked around Cro-Magnon, and they walked out of there 40,000 years ago and populated the whole world. Are Africans. Like, we all got the DNA, there's African DNA in everybody. There's not a person on the planet that to go all the way back to end up in Africa somewhere. Like, that's what we're building on. We have a foundation that if we get a hold of it right, we can move through the world. That's why you have to teach this to young people, because, you know, if you can convince a kid that your ancestors built the pyramids, they can do their algebra homework. Don't tell me you can't do your algebra homework. Your ancestors built the pyramids, for Christ's sake. Come on, get back to work. You know, no excuses. Don't let people tell you you don't have a brain. Of course you had a brain. They're telling you you don't have one because they don't want you to use the one that you have. You know, and part of Black studies is that for Black people is you learn what you did so you know you can do things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's everywhere. You know, up and down. There's no boundaries from the North Pole to the South Pole. If there's a person of African descent, they're part of us. I don't have any boundaries on that.
Yeah, we have a question that's coming in, and there's a professor as well as a student, excuse me, who's asking a similar sort of question. And I'm just going to paraphrase here, but how did you start these Black Studies programs at your respective universities? You know, for a small to medium-sized college like UMaine, I guess UMaine's more on the medium side, thinking about trying to start something here, where do you see that beginning? In hiring, in diversifying syllabi?
I hope you don't do what we had to do. We had to take over a building in Northwestern to get Black Studies. I hope you don't have to do that. And in San Francisco State too, we had to fight for the right to educate white people. Right, we had to knock the doors open and demand that they make their university relevant to the 20th century. They fought tooth and nail, not to learn anything. You know, it's willful. They were fighting for the right to remain ignorant. So we had to get their attention. And in case of Northwestern, by holding a building until they agreed, and we gave it back. And then we had Black Studies. We had C.L.R. James and Lerone Bennett. Hopefully, we're past that now. We're 2 generations past that. What you have a situation where you're not going to have a lot of Black people, but that doesn't mean you can't study Black people. You have courses in the Middle East and courses in Russia. You don't have a lot of Russians in Maine, but you still can study Russian. No, Black people are not an alien species. We're human beings, right? Of course, you can hire people to study Black people and teach them. They may not know as much as somebody that is a Black person. And if you can't get a Black person, you get a white person that has a sensibility that's honest and sincere and wants to learn. You know, you're not going to get perfection because, you know, it's open to everybody. Black Studies is not just Black people teaching about Black people. When I started off in Black Studies, I deliberately wanted, and you did this in history, I wanted all the leading scholars in the country to study Black people. We were successful in that. All of the leading white historians in this country, American history, study Black people. Whether you talk about Eric Foner or David Blight or David Roediger, these are all guys that came out of the left in the 60s. I said, look, you study your piece of Black people. Eugene Genovese studied slavery. No. You want the smartest minds devoted to studying Black people, right? So you don't need Black people if you don't have them, but that means you can't teach about Black people, right? Just like I could teach a course on China if I want. I'm not Chinese, but I can read enough to teach. You know, I'd be better if there was a Chinese person, but absent that, you do the best you can. That's what you do where you are. You start with the basics. How can you teach American literature? Seriously. And not like teach Zora Neale Hurston or Langston Hughes or Paul Laurence Dunbar. Not to say Toni Morrison. Who is the greatest American novelist of the 20th, 21st century? Toni Morrison. You got another name you want to throw up there against that? Come on. Keep looking, find another one. Who is the leading American intellectual of the 20th century? W.B. Du Bois. I got money. Go to the library and go look at Google anything you want. You find me an American academic that equals W.B. Du Bois in productivity, insight, impact, right? That you don't know that is your education problem, not Du Bois's problem. Go back. He wrote 19 books, 3,000 articles, lived at 95, right? Could write plays, poetry, 700-page book, Black Reconstruction. The first sociological study, which you can still read. You can't read white sociology from 1890 because it's all crap. All that racist foolishness. Du Bois wrote the Philadelphia Negro. He wasn't even 30 years old. If that's all he wrote, he'd be one of the leading scholars. Anybody can do that. You can go find these people and you learn about them and you teach them. You start with that. You know, whatever course you have, there's a Black component to it. That's what I did before Black Studies. Whatever class I took, I would say, I want to write about Black people in relationship to this topic. The progressive movement. What about Black people? The populist movement. What about Black people? The American South. What about, you can't name a part of American society. The West. What about Black people? You know, Alaska. What about Black people? There's no part of the hemisphere, no part of the world that Black people are not there. So whatever your specialty is, stop and look and say, were there any Black people there? And they will be there. You will find them. And then you can expand the knowledge base that way. You get enough of those people and you just find each other. You know, send out the call. How many people teach anything about Black people? Well, why don't we get together and get a study group and try to work on that? That's easy to do. You teach American literature, don't teach no Black people. You're not teaching American literature, you're teaching the white American literature. Don't get confused. That's white American. You're not teaching American, you're white. Are you teaching English literature? Are you teaching Chinua Achebe? You're not teaching English literature. You're teaching white people that write in English. Like, you're not teaching, you got Achebe, George Lamming? Come on. You know, and all those wonderful African women writers writing today, there's so many I can't even keep track of them. You know, some of the greatest writing in the world, these young African, they're Nigerian, they're Ghanaian, they're all over, everywhere. They're in Canada, they're in England, they write these beautiful, beautiful books. You know, there's so many of them, I got them stacked up, I can't get through all of them. They write, you start to cry. There's a sister from Ethiopia that writes about Ethiopia, it brings tears to your eyes. She writes with such beauty, you know, about the genocides and so forth, and the barbarism of Ethiopian civil wars. And it just, it's you know, teach her.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, you know, it's not that hard. You have to duck around Black people to miss them. You bump into them and have to back away and make like they're not there. But if you're serious about American culture, we're right there. Like I don't see how you can, you know.
And if you're serious about this democracy, you've got to teach it. I mean, that's the whole point of this.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, which is our contribution to America. We don't want to believe in democracy anyway.
I will plug that this fall, I and 2 other teachers developed a course called Black Feminist Thought and Expression that will be taught through the communication and journalism department. And so if you're a graduate student or an eager undergrad, please look out for that and get in while you can, because there's a lot of goodness, a lot of goodness. So I'm going to ask just 2 more questions. We got one for Dr. Sanchez, which says, how did Black studies atriculate with Native studies at San Francisco University in the 1960s? This was a period of great civil rights activism in both communities.
Right. Well, you know, the point is that most of what we did was that we were supporting each other. I was there for 2 or 3 years, and I don't know if you know that we had a major strike, so all the things that were happening just ceased at some particular point. But we barely got the Black studies part off the ground. What was good about it is that when we began to teach, many of the other people began to come into our classrooms to learn and to study and to take the writing classes also too. As I said, in one of my classes there, when I was teaching, you know, a lit class, and someone came and said, look here, Professor Sanchez, here's this poster here, and we think it's about Japanese people being put in concentration camps. And I held it up for my students. I had 2 Japanese American students in my class. And I said to them, they got very angry. And later on, as we left the classroom, I handed the poster to one of them. They came back in the following Tuesday with tears in their eyes and said their parents told them an amazing story about they were put in concentration camps. It's a couple of interesting things that I've learned. In some of the concentration camps, one of the things that someone wrote me is that kept them alive was that they learned how to write haiku. I love the haiku. I always say the haiku is a living force, but they began to teach each other the haiku in order to stay alive. But the other thing that was equally as important to me in terms of the concentration camps was simply that these two students, one of the students began to do work on her parents and the Japanese American concentration camps. And I was in a place called Seattle, and I had done this huge program with thousands of people. And all of a sudden I looked up when people had surrounded me, and I saw this young Japanese American, I'm saying girl, but she was a young woman, but she was moving like a little girl, jumping the steps, coming down the steps, and she ran across the stage. And it was one of my students from San Francisco State. And she said, "Did you see it? Did you see it? Did you see the documentary I did on the Japanese in concentration camps?" That's what we're talking about. That is what we're not giving someone a book to read about themselves, but also making them write on what happened to their parents. They interviewed their parents in terms of having been in a concentration camp. And we also began to make people understand at some point that what happened to us, I could not teach then Black studies. I could not teach the history. I could not teach a Black writer who lived in the West, whatever, et cetera, without mentioning the fact that the Chinese were building railroads, also, in the West. And sometimes they banged that dynamite and they exploded, in amazing yellows at some particular point. That kind of reality happened. So one of the things that we did is that we had people who began to set up courses there at the university, all right, that they were going to have a course on Chicano studies, a course on Japanese American studies. All of that came out of a place called San Francisco State. And it went in 1 year, it began to go all over the country. My dear sister, was that a brother who asked me or a sister who asked the question?
A sister.
My dear sister, that's what happened at some particular point. And we would send people out from the BSU to help them begin something. Those BSU students learned so very much, that they would go out and begin to teach, and we began to talk about you're going to teach, not just in the classroom, you're going to go into the high schools and also teach this history that you're learning. That is the reality. So it's not by chance then that it began to spread all over. From San Francisco State, I went to a place called Pittsburgh. We began at the University of Pittsburgh, the first Black studies there. And we began to talk about that. And that great playwright, he settled in Seattle, John. He did all the great plays on Broadway. Ooh, come on.
It's not.
Huh?
Who went to Seattle? It wasn't August Wilson. He stayed
August
in
Wilson, yes,
August
he did.
Wilson, yeah.
He was born in Pittsburgh, right? August Wilson would come and ask, "Will you let me come along and read some of my poetry?" And we said, sure, because we invited everybody. And I remember August Wilson read his first poem, and it was this long, lengthy, involved thing. And I said to Rob Pitty, who was a playwright, I said, "Rob, did you hear how he described that person?" He said, "Yes." I said, "He's a playwright. This is what happened." And Rob said, I said, "Take him under your wings and teach him how to write plays." And Rob Pitty did that. Isn't that amazing? So huh?
No, I was going to say, go ahead. You finish?
I'm okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, because the question reminded me that I have to get my reading list in, because I teach a course on Native Americans, African Americans. We taught Joyce White Deer Vincent and I taught the first course in this country taught by a Native American and African American. I didn't know that until we taught that. We taught it for about 15 years. Joyce is retired now. But we taught it because Native students came to us and said, how come Black people were taking all these Native people and claiming they were Black and not acknowledging their Native heritage? And I'm saying, like, whoa, wait a minute, like, who are we talking about here? They say, well, how about Paul Robeson? How about T. Thomas Fortune? How about Tanya? I said, okay, time out, okay, I'll teach you. No, you can have everybody you want, but you can't have all my people. Like Frederick Douglass. Look, 1/4 of the minimum 1/4 of the African American population is mixed with natives. Like Sonia's family got native. Tony said, well, you got Choctaw. My family quite likely has Cherokee, going into from South Carolina going down into Florida. Right. What I found out, which because I had Pequot kids and what's the other group down there? The Wampanoags, right? Who, when they would take the class, would question me on why did I say everybody got sent out to the reservations, you know, with the Trail of Tears? And the kid raised his hand and say, we're still here. We haven't gone anywhere. So I said, come talk to me. I don't want to be talking something that's wrong. So I've been a close advisor with the Native kids on my campus since a sister named Josephine White Eagle came years ago to set up Native. I taught it for like 20 years. I take the kids to the Pequot Museum. You go to DC, my favorite museum. Even though I love my own people, I like the Native American Museum because I think the food is a little bit better. And in fact, a whole lot better.
I'm just going to interrupt you very quickly. That's my job. It looks like we are going over, so if you cannot stay, that's fine. This will be recorded and available on YouTube.
YouTube.
But yeah, YouTube. So if you can stay, great. If not, you're free, but we will keep talking and just go over a little bit and end with a poem from Dr. Sanchez.
Yeah. So, you know, if somebody wants some syllabi, I've got syllabi to go back about, I've got about 5, 6, 7. I think I've got to get one in because I'm teaching starting next week and I'm still messing with the books. No, that you can't understand the African-American population in the eastern half of the United States without understanding the relationship to Native Americans. It's virtually impossible. It's where you ran away to. It's the people that you could merge within and hide yourself and be Native, you know, and who would not let you be given back as a runaway because they would claim they own you. And white people respected that. So a lot of those cases, you're talking about Indian slavery or black people. No, a lot of times you'll get like the Creeks were not that great, but the Cherokee and so forth, they would say that because white people understood that. They would say, you can't have them. He was a runaway and he's mine now. And they say, okay, we respect private property. You ain't private property. Mm-hmm. You're living in a Native community. You got your own space. You're living with them. But every time white people show up looking for it, they say, no, he's ours, right? People don't understand that, so they write books about how Native Americans enslaved black people. Well, a few of them did, but that was not the norm. The norm was how do you hide people among yourself? The Seminoles are nothing but that. You know, the Seminoles are this amazing amalgamation of African Americans and Native Americans. You can't possibly separate them out. There's no way you can do that. You'd have to split people down the middle and have half their head over here, half their head over there to get it pulled out. The SNCC leadership in Mississippi is Choctaw. Mm-hmm. Right? If you're talking about MacArthur Cotton, if you talk about Vernon Dahmer, you know, you talk about all those people that lead SNCC and that led the civil rights movement are Choctaws, right? But they identify as African American, but their ancestry is Choctaws. The name of the football team at Alcorn University is the Braves, not because they appropriated that, because they have a huge number of Afro-Indians that went to Alcorn, so they named their team the Braves, right? The emblem for the Tougaloo College, you know, the Tougaloo official mascot is the bulldog. The students wear the eagle because they're Native Americans. They say, you wear the bulldog. Bulldog don't mean nothing to us. Eagle does. Mm-hmm. So if you buy a hat in the shop when you go down to Tougaloo, you get hats with eagles on them. And they say, well, what does that have to do with Tougaloo? If you don't know, we're not going to tell you. No, we are so close, to say nothing of the Wampanoags and the Pequots. I mean, it's the first powwow I went to, I kept saying, why are all these black people here? And the guy started laughing. He said, we're Pequots. Well, how come you look like black people? And they said, we'll explain it to you. I mean, what do they do? I mean, you go to the Pequot Museum, you think they have a lot of black people. I thought, wow, they have a lot of colored people down there. They're Pequots. They're Pequots. The tribal council is brothers. Hats on backwards, they billionaires because they run the casinos, but they roll up in a pickup truck, head Timberlands on, jackets, you know. But they run, you know, being out, but they're mixed, you know. And that's the reality of that. You know, I don't know how you pull people out, because if you mix, you don't get shipped out to the West. So a lot of Native Americans passed for African American in the South, so they wouldn't get shipped off to a reservation. You know, every black college has Native American organizations. Howard's had one since the 1860s. Tuskegee put out a magazine called The Southern Workman. Half the articles are on Native Americans. Tuskegee and Hampton, they made all over the place, everywhere. We all, like, I don't know how you can separate us out. We just have to acknowledge that, deal with that. You know, Ron Welburn, the leading black arts poet, is a Native American. He now writes as a Native American. He's in Black Fire. He writes about jazz. Right, teaches at UMass. He now writes as a Native American because he was kind of passing for Black during the Black Power period. And he said, this is not really me. I really am more this. And so now he was the head of our Native American Studies program. You know, that's their foundational. Those are the people that share the grievance that we have. They stole our labor. They stole the whole continent from Native Americans, like the whole thing. That's the only thing they had more value than slave labor was the land that they stole the whole continent, the whole thing, like everything. They ain't buying nothing for it. No, nothing. They stole the whole thing, right? That's why when Black people talk about 5 states, we ought to be negotiating with Native Americans, not with white people. You know, if you say you want 5 states in Mississippi, you got to negotiate with Native Americans because white people don't own it; they stole it. You don't deal with that, then you can't deal with that complex reality. Yes. You know, so if anyone wants to get in touch with me, I can send you syllabi and reading lists and people to talk to. It's a very, very important subject. It's important in Latin America too, because of the strength of the indigenous populations. You know, the Mayans, the Toltecs, and so forth. You know, I mean, it's very, very important.
We'll make sure that your contact information is description of the video or something. Someone can get in contact with you.
You ask whatever. I'm on look up the department. You'll find me.
Yeah. In closing, we want to listen to Dr. Sanchez recite an incredibly moving poem of hers, and then we will be adjourning our webinar. So thank you for sticking around on YouTube or in the Zoom for as long as you have. So Dr. Sanchez, whenever you're ready.
Sure. Bernice Reagan called me one day and said, Sister Sonia, we're going to record a version of I'm Going to Stay on the Battlefield. And we'd like for you to put some lyrics to it. And I said, sure, no, good deal. But I went away to do, I think I was away for 4 weeks to do a 4 weeks in Florida, a workshop. It's either 4 weeks. And every night they had done the music and I would listen to the music. I'd go to sleep with it. But I came back home and I was awakened one morning and it was Bernice. And she said, we hear you're coming down to the Smithsonian to do a reading. And I said, oh, yes, I am. And she said, well, would you bring the lyrics, the words that you wrote for the music? And I said, right. And so I got on the train, I got there, I did my talk, I did my reading. I saw the person from Bernice's office sitting in the audience, right? I waved to her. I went out the side door, got on the train and went back home. And I said, I blew it completely, right? I had blown the opportunity to record with Sweet Honey in the Rock. And in the morning, about 7:30 in the morning, I heard Bernice said, dear Sonia. I said, yes, this is Bernice. She said, when do you think, she's an artist, so she knew, when do you think you can get the lyrics to us? I said, give me 2 days, right? And I did. And this is what I wrote. I'm going to stay on the battlefield. I'm going to stay on the battlefield. I'm going to stay on the battlefield till I die. I'm going to stay on the battlefield. I'm going to stay on the battlefield. I'm going to stay on the battlefield till I die. I had come into the city carrying life in my eyes amid rumors of death, calling out to everyone who would listen. It is time to move us all into another century, time for freedom and racial and sexual justice, time for women and children and men, time for hands unbound. I had come into the city wearing peaceful breasts and the spaces between us smiled. I had come into the city carrying life in my eyes. I had come into the city carrying life in my eyes. And they follow us in their cars with their computers, and their tongues crawl with caterpillars. And they bumped us off the road, turned over our cars, and they bombed our buildings, killed our babies, and they shot our doctors maintaining our bodies. And their courts changed into confessionals. But we kept on organizing, we kept on teaching, believing, loving, doing what was holy, moving to a higher ground, even though our hands were full of slaughtered teeth. but we held out our eyes, delirious with grace. But we held out our eyes, delirious with grace. I'm going to treat everybody right. I'm going to treat everybody right. I'm going to treat everybody right till I die. I'm going to treat everybody right. I'm going to treat everybody right. I'm going to treat everybody right till I die. Come. I say, come, you sitting still in domestic bacteria. Come, I say, come, you standing still in double-breasted mornings. Come, I say, come and return to the fight. This fight for the earth. This fight for our children, this fight for our life. We need your hurricane voices. We need your sacred hands. I say, come, sister, brother, to the battlefield. Come into the rainforest. Come into the hood. Come into the barrio. Come into the schools. Come into the abortion clinics. Come into the cities. Come into the voting booths. Come into the prisons. Come and caress our spines. I say, come. Wrap your feet around justice. I say, come. Wrap your tongues around truth. I say, come. Wrap your hands with deeds and prayer, you brown ones, you black ones, you gay ones, you white ones, you lesbian ones, you Muslim ones, you Jewish ones, you LGBTQ ones. Come, 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 come to this battlefield called life, called life, called life. Called life. I'm going to say on the battlefield. I'm going to say on the battlefield. I'm going to stay on the battlefield till I die. I'm going to stay on the battlefield. I'm going to stay on the battlefield. I'm going to stay on the battlefield till I die. Come, 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 come to this battlefield called life, 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 life. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us. I want to give a special thanks obviously to Dr. Sanchez, Dr. Bracy. Thank you for gracing us with your presence tonight. I want to thank all of our sponsors who made this event possible, and a dear thank you to the Alumni Association for graciously hosting us today. I hope that everyone remains safe and healthy, and take care. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes.
No, thank you for doing this.
Yes. Peace to you. Thank you. Thank you very much. What an honor to be here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Mask up. Wash your hands.
That's right.
Yes.
Put your mask on. Put a double mask on. Right. Yeah.
Double mask is the new mask.
That's right.